joining us on this topic. And it's a bit of a different type of session than we normally do. But, I want to share some things that I've heard from many, many folks across medical affairs. One, within medical affairs, we are a highly matrix, very cross functional team. I mean, you're working typically with people across all sorts of time zones, both nationally and globally. I'm hearing people tell me over and over again they're getting on camera at 8 o'clock in the morning and they're still on it after dinner. I hear that we only get to see each other once or twice a year. I don't even really know the people that I get to work with anymore. And that there's thousands of Microsoft Teams channels and then I can never find anything. And it just keeps growing uncontrollably. And now I'm hearing a lot of folks talk about how there's this return to the office mandate where people are being told they have to come in 3 or 4 days a week and the commute's killing them. And they're getting notices if they're even traveling for work that they're not being compliant to their new policies. And it's feeling very overwhelming for people. And in fact, if we look, I want to thank so many of you who commented on LinkedIn. Scott Maxon from Gilead and Vanessa Jacobson for Regeneron asked about, what we do with all this fragmented attention with all these alerts popping up all the time. And Christina Tankersley from Sanofi is asking about how we protect our time when there are like so many meetings that we don't even just really need to be at in person. Blaine Creasy from Genentech asked about maintaining that personal connectivity with people in a remote world. Brant from Mallinckrodt, also the Maps Insights chair, I was asking how we create this balance of being on video, off video, and still have check-ins with people. And Jeff Narvid from Gilead, I see you on here, was asking about how to apply remote principles in a world where every project has people in it from different countries, different teams. Some are remote, some are office based, and it continues to increase in complexity. So with that, I want to welcome and introduce our session. We're going to answer all of these questions in today's webinar, Running Remote in Medical Affairs. I'm thrilled that you're here. We're going to really explore some remote first strategies and how they're transforming the way medical affairs teams operate, collaborate, and scale their impact. As some of your companies continue to adapt to hybrid and remote environments and others have that whole return to office mandate, medical affairs is facing some very unique opportunities and challenges to maintain productivity, clarity, and connection across geographies and time zones. And so today we're going to dive into some of how the world's like best, most successful remote companies are getting it right and what we can learn from them to improve how we work in medical affairs. And so I am incredibly excited to welcome our special guest, Liam Martin. Liam is a serial entrepreneur and is globally recognized as like the thought leader in remote work. He's co-founder of Time Doctor and Staff.com, some of the most widely used time tracking and productivity platforms in the world, used across global brands everywhere. That's not all. Liam is also the co-organizer of the world's largest remote work conference called Running Remote, which brings together companies and leaders building fully distributed teams. And he's no stranger to pharma, having worked with Roche and others around the industry. He's also the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the book Running Remote, Mastering the Lessons from World's Most Successful Remote Pioneers. And in that book, which I love and I've read it multiple times, Liam unpacks these common threads that are shared by these thriving remote companies and really digs into how they're building with intentionality, culture, and autonomy at the core. So we're going to dig into all of the questions that you guys asked on LinkedIn. If you guys have any questions during the session, drop them in the chat and we will make sure we cover every single one of them as we have this conversation. So with that, whether you're leading a field team across time zones, managing a global strategy, supporting medical affairs operations, you will walk away with an actionable framework to make asynchronous not only possible, but powerful. So with that, Liam, welcome. So glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Very much do appreciate the intro. And I didn't know that you read the book multiple times, which is fantastic. Before everyone gets started, one of the things that I think is really important is if you have an iPad with a little pencil, write down your notes because I'm going to be putting out a lot of information in a very short amount of time. And those comments, Scott, that you had before, we're going to try to address as many of those as possible. I think I probably will be able to address all of them inside of the presentation. And then towards the very end, if anyone is interested in getting to the very end, I'm also going to hand out some free books if anyone is interested. As Scott said, this is the book that he's read multiple times, which is better than me saying it's a Wall Street Journal best seller. So I want to start this talk off today with asking a question. And I start every talk off with asking a question because I think it's a really good way of thinking about all of the problems that we've had over the last couple of years and more specifically over the last couple of months. So the question that I have for all of you is, why did some companies not just survive, but thrive during the pandemic? Why were there some companies that seemed to not pay attention to all of the assumptions that we made about work? Because to be completely honest with you, during COVID, we didn't have any offices. We didn't have any team building lunches. I personally did not get a birthday cake from the company in the office or otherwise. They didn't FedEx me one to my home office here. I didn't get any pizza Thursdays, which, by the way, that pizza is very, very cold the vast majority of the time. We didn't even get any nap rooms. We did not survive COVID with nap rooms. However, I did take a lot more naps during COVID than after COVID, which I think was actually a net positive for my mental health. So why did some companies not just survive, but thrive during the pandemic? To be able to answer that question, I have to take you back to essentially February of 2020 and specifically March of 2020. So this is a buddy of mine's data set. It's a VPN that specifically serves remote companies. And you see that massive spike up in usage. That was a 4x increase in 3 days. I personally, during that time with Time Doctor, which is our time tracking tool specifically designed for remote workers, we had a G20 country that deployed their entire government on our system on a credit card and crashed one of our Amazon Web Service cloud nodes. We thought that we were getting hacked. Thought it had a denial of service attack. No, it was just a country that was going to deploy 500,000 people on the system. It was a wild March, I got to tell you. But during that time, in February of 2020, 4% of the US workforce was working remotely. By March, how many of you, what do you think? I'd love for everyone to put it down in the chat. What percentage of the US workforce do you think was working remotely in March of 2020? I'll give you 5 seconds. And whoever gets exactly the right percentage point, I'll send you a free book. All right. And I can't see the chat, so hopefully it
Really
goes
says
through.
75%.
All right. So it was 45% of the US workforce working remotely. That's the biggest shift in work since the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution took about 80 years, and we did that in March. So it transformed everything that we understood about not just work, but how we socialize together, how we interact together. And we're still feeling those waves today. I mean, I wouldn't be here had it not been presenting for you and for Scott, had it not been for these types of changes that occurred. So I have a really cool data set that Google took down because they were realizing that basically, if you have one of these things, Google is tracking everything that you're doing. And they just don't want to tell you that. And this data set was up for about 1.5 years before they pulled it down because there was some bad PR. But Google will measure what you're doing with your time. Are you going to the mall? Are you going to the grocery store? Are you going to parks? So this is that data. So mobility changes over time. And you can see that big, huge baseline number, and then that big drop off during March and April, and then a return to the mean. Same thing for parks. So we went to a lot more parks during the pandemic. And this is workplace activity. So this is what's interesting. We had this huge drop off, and then we had a return to the mean, but nowhere near as much as any other category. And here's another data set that I even like even more. This is called the Castleback to Work Barometer System. So if you go to castle.com, you can check it out for yourself. I literally just put this in the presentation yesterday because I always want the most up-to-date data. And what this data set does is it analyzes the metro activity, meaning the use of public transportation in the top 10 cities in the United States. And it also measures the amount of times that people swipe a magnetic office card. So very, very precise data. And you can see pre-COVID levels, we were at 100. We dropped down to essentially 90% of people not going back to the office. And right now, we are consistently, not just over the last month, quarter, or year, after the last 3 years, we're approximately at about 50% of the US workforce that is back inside of an office. And so I think there's a lot of interesting propaganda that's happening right now inside of remote work. And you've probably heard a lot of these questions before. You're probably just what Scott had mentioned. There's a lot of companies that are dealing with return to office mandates at this point. And I hear them all in all the talks that I'm doing. And here are the top ones. So no one's productive anymore. Nobody knows what to do. I don't think these guys are actually working. Or the one that is the wildest is remote work is BS and morally wrong.
The productivity issue, but
Yeah.
it's also a moral issue. You also get off the moral high horse with their work from home because they're asking everyone else to not work from home while they do.
Now, whether you love or hate Elon, I think he's completely wrong on this one, to be completely honest with everyone here. And I'm going to lay that out very specifically. So from the peak of March of 2020 at 45%, we're now sitting, dependent upon the study that you take a look at between 26 and 44% of the US workforce working remotely or hybrid. So that's in the United States. And so inside of that number, about 16% are remote, fully remote. And then the biggest component of that are hybrid. But we are still, and this has not changed in the last 2.5 years, pretty consistent. We are at a rock solid level. That has not changed in the last 2.5 years. Essentially, it's changed like 2 to 3 percentage points over the last 2.5 years. So remote work is not going away. And if there's one thing that I can communicate to you, it's that it's not going away. And assuming that it will is not the right direction forward for you as a manager, HR leader, business owner. You have to understand how to be able to manage remotely. And this is the thesis of this core talk. So I have a bit of a crazy statement to make for you. I believe that remote work is a permanent civilizational shift. And I think it's a consequence of the internet itself that's even more important than the internet itself. And I know that that sounds wild to a lot of people. And you must be thinking, oh, Liam's just this wild remote work guy that, his head is up in the clouds with regards to this. Well, that wasn't me. That was Mark Andreessen of Andreessen and Horowitz, arguably the best investor in the history of mankind. And they were the first ones that invested in Facebook and Twitter and a bunch of other businesses that have been incredibly successful. And when I look at this, I think that the big aha moment that completely changed my perspective on how work is done is now what I really want to be able to share with everybody here, which is also the subject of my Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Running Remote, which people like Cal Newport called a critical, much-needed guide to the thriving new world in asynchronous work. The core thing that I wanted to really tell you is that when I interviewed companies before the pandemic that were working remotely, 7, 8, 9-figure remote-first companies, they all had one singular thing in common. And when I figured out that they all had this one singular thing in common, I realized I have to write a book about this particular subject because it's the one thing that everyone missed when they just had this emergency transition over to remote work. And that one thing is, before we kind of get into that, is really reinforcing the core concept here of asynchronous work. So the ability to be able to work without actually communicating directly with other people on a video call or on a phone call or in person. That's the core differentiator that most of these remote first companies had that differed them from everyone else inside of the work world. And I'm going to be rolling through that with you over the last, next part of my presentation. But I wanted to also touch on this as well. We're obviously seeing this pushback to the office. I would probably say that Mr. Musk is one of the architects of that particular process, but I recognize that a lot of people are probably really stressed out about this. The number one request that I get from HR managers that talk to me is, okay, how do I make this return to office transition as seamless as possible? Because all of my employees don't want to be able to work from home or want to work from home. And the CEO and the CFO and the COO say, no, we have this very expensive office space and we need everyone to be able to come back into the office. And Scott, I think you have
Yeah,
some other points kind of connected to this with regards to return to office.
absolutely. Just as we've been scouring the internet, you guys, those who know us know that we do a lot of social monitoring, social listening of HCPs. We also kind of were looking at many of your organizations and have started to identify which companies have declared a long-term flexible work plan where, they're going, as you'll hear the term, remote first, but still use the office versus others that are return to office and once in a while work from home if you need to, and putting in rules, whether it's be there for 3 days, making sure. And 3 days seems to be about the same. Some are 50% saying you have to be there over the course of a month, but they're putting these rules in place to bring people in. And one of the things that I want to, the kind of the big reason after seeing this and talking to Liam about it, that I wanted to cover this next section on asynchronous leadership, asynchronous management, is that even if we have a return to office in medical affairs, not everybody's in the office. And so then you
Mhm.
have some people in the office, some people in another remote office, some people working from home, and they're never all there at the same time. And they're still global in nature, and we're still going to have some of the same problems that we're having via a pure remote world, and they get even more compounded. And Liam's going to share some of the unique things that happens when you have some people in office and some people remote that makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, and we'll get into that at the end. I know there's a specific question around that. To go back to core data points, so returned or hybrid, this applies to both. Remote, 13% more productive. Just want to be able to reinforce this. And I also have all of these referenced. So if you want to be able to get the slides afterwards, I can show you the specific studies that these are referenced from. The first one is from Nick Bloom, who is the preeminent academic on remote work in general. He is actually coming to Running Remote, which is happening at the end of this month, which is incredibly exciting. And he has done the largest scale study to date on this particular subject and has found a 13% net increase in remote and hybrid. Remote workers work on average one more day per week, which is probably not good, to be honest with you, but they work more. So if you're a business owner and you are really focused on getting more hours in, remote workers are the people for you. They on average start earlier and end later in the day because they just don't have to do the commute fundamentally. When you pull 2 hours out of a commute per day, it's a lot easier to be able to work a little bit harder inside of your work. And the biggest one, which I think is most important here, is remote workers have a 50% lower attrition rate. So half as many remote workers quit than in-office workers because the number one reason why people quit their jobs is inter-office politics. That doesn't exist when you're in a remote or even a hybrid environment where you can kind of escape that environment from time to time. And a lot of HR managers don't believe this data because they're really focused on retention as a core metric, but remote companies are definitely more effective, and we have a lot of data to be able to back that up. A little bit about me. So, as Scott had said, I'm co-founder of Time Doctor and Staff.com, which are both time tracking tools for remote teams. I'm also the co-organizer of Running Remote, which is the largest conference on building and scaling remote teams. And we are doing the next one in Austin, Texas, April 28th, which is incredibly exciting. If anyone is interested in coming, please let me know. If you're in the Texas area, please let me know definitely, and I can set you up. We have team members in 27 different countries from around the world, and we collaborate seamlessly because of, as I said, that one singular thing that everyone understood pre-COVID about remote work that no one really understands today, and that is asynchronous management, the practice of leading teams without simultaneous or synchronous communication. So fundamentally what it is work focuses on individual autonomy, allowing all team members to maximize their own productivity without being dependent upon others to provide updates. And this was one of those things that differentiates successful remote companies from everyone else. Simply put, if you are trying to recreate the office, you're never actually going to make the mental shift needed to build a successful remote team. And the operating system for that success is, in my opinion, asynchronous management. And there are just 3 simple tenets to building asynchronous management. The first one is deliberate over communication. Now's the time to get your pen out and write that down. The second one is democratized workflows. And the third one is detailed metrics, or what I like to call the 3Ds. So that way you can have a mental lock in your mind: deliberate over communication, democratized workflows, and detailed metrics. Let's talk about the first one. My friend Nathan Barry, he put this better than me. There are 2 types of companies that currently exist right now. There's remote first and remote forced. And let me explain the difference to you. If you're in Zoom calls 8 hours a day, getting Slack or team messages on your phone at 9 p.m., told to report to your weekly company team culture session, where you sit around your laptops and watch a video of someone playing Cards Against Humanity, not the fun version, however, the HR appropriate version, you're in a remote forced culture. And this is exactly counter to deliberate over communication. So fundamentally, when I think about this, I really think about Simon Sinek's famous talk on finding your company's why. If anyone is interested in it, just Google it, Simon Sinek company why. It's a great, great talk. And I think that everyone tries to measure culture through how you work together. This is a really great company, Doist, that focuses in on this and kind of alluded to it much better than I could. Instead, I think culture should be defined by why you work there in the first place. So identifying why you're here and why the work that you do actually matters, why you think this company is doing something that will change the world in a positive way, is all part of deliberately communicating why you do what you do. So when I go into a company that is having trouble really understanding their company culture, I'll go into an office, if they are all in an office, and I'll say, laptops down, get out a piece of paper, write down the mission of the company. What is the company's mission? Write down the vision of the company. How does the company see the world? And then write down the values of the company. And usually there's like 4 or 5 or 6. And the majority of the time, about 26% of employees get it right. In context, for Time Doctor, 86% of our employees get it right whenever I do one of these pop quizzes. And so you're probably around the same level. But here's the reality is, number one, is the mission something that people are really passionate about? You probably actually, on the first step, need to go back to your executive team and say, this mission really sucks. People don't understand it, or it's not getting true to who we really are as a company, and it's not getting everyone excited. We need to be able to rebuild that mission. And then once you have something that's really exciting that everyone is really aligned towards, then you need to communicate that as much as possible. You need to use that in your hiring. We do something inside of Time Doctor and all of our other companies called negative interview questions. So as an example, I would ask a question like, we really like remote work inside of our company, but we do know that everyone needs to come into an office from time to time. So if you take on this position, we would really like it if you can show up to the office 3 to 4 days per week. Now, our mission is to empower the world's transition towards remote work. That's what we do as a company. So obviously that question directly conflicts with the mission of the company. And what we're looking for is for people to not agree with us and say, I think I have a problem with that. I think that that's a big issue that we need to be able to address, because I thought that you were focused on remote work. Why are we being dragged inside of an office? But 80% of people just agree with us, and those are the people that we don't let in. And then we focus on the 20 that have really kind of drank the Kool-Aid when it applies to remote work. Next, you need to build a culture of democratized workflows. And what does that mean exactly? Well, here's what it means. Everyone should be able to document everything inside of the organization. A company that runs digitally is a company that can actually document everything. So the advantage you get is to access everything at all times. So if all communication is digital and recorded, then everyone can be everywhere all the time. Secondly, the information is actually available to you when you want to be able to consume it. So when you build a culture of written documentation, there are no private conversations. You have an environment of radical transparency where anyone can look at anything inside of your company. And you basically end up with a company where any decision at any point can actually be analyzed, audited, and optimized. I often tell people that they should have a system in place where a kind of business archaeologist, which is basically like, I can't remember the name of this guy, but the
Indiana.
guy that's got the whip and the gun and he shoots
Indiana
people.
Jones.
Indiana Jones. Thank you very much, Scott. They can go in and they can actually figure out why a decision was made and whether it was the right one. So one of the things that I was telling Scott previously was, if I just tossed you into our company and all of our project management systems, and I asked you, why did we make a decision 3 years ago? Why did we make this specific decision? You should be able to figure out the answer. And so without that documentation, it creates an environment where you don't have the right information to be able to make critical business decisions. And I often talk about how, and I know that this is a big stretch for everybody, we don't have to get there all in one go, but ideally, the amount of information that everyone should have should equal the amount of information that the CEO has, so that you should have the same informational advantage as the CEO of the company, to then allow you to be able to make all of these business decisions independently and autonomously from the other people inside of the organization. And when you give people this power, it's incredibly exciting because they actually end up making really good business decisions. It's not that the CEO is smarter, sorry, Scott, but it's that the actual information is the differentiator as to whether or not people make good decisions or bad decisions the vast majority of the time. So I got a process for this, which is, I call it the 4Ds. I like to use Ds a lot. It's called discover, design, deploy, and debug. So first is discovering the history of the process. Like, why are things done that particular way? I have a funny story connected to this. My mother would always cut up a ham into 2 pieces and before it would go in the oven. And I'd say, why do you cut up the ham into 2 pieces? Oh, well, my mother did it. Why do you ask her? Go ask grandmother. Why do you cut up the ham into 2 pieces? I don't know. My mother did it. I go to talk to my great grandmother. And then the great grandmother says, because I had a small pan. So I had to cut it into 2 pieces in order to be able to put it into the oven properly, right? You need to understand the history of the process because the history of the process may be really dumb. You may need to be able to change it fundamentally. Next part is design. So taking the lessons that you've learned from the history phase, you're going to build a process with a rule of 3, meaning tell me 3 things that are wrong with this process. Then you go into the deploy stage. You take it to your employees. Don't ask them what's right. Ask them what's wrong. Get them to give you that good feedback, giving you meaningful feedback so that you can actually improve the process. Then you go back to the design and deploy stage through the debug stage to basically get yourself to perfect process. And Scott actually built his own process for this, which I will help him go through.
Absolutely. So, I know a lot of you are using Microsoft Teams, and I hear this a lot, that Teams is a disaster. And I have
What
spoken
a
to
disaster. Teams is great.
Teams.
A lot of people hate on Teams. I personally use Slack, but I have to tell you, Teams is a fantastic platform. It's just really complicated.
Well, and the reason that it is a disaster in so many places is that they're not following best practices for asynchronous work, right? And so we have 10 tips for you, 10 steps. And I actually worked through these with really one person in a pharma company who says, "Oh, I love Teams. I couldn't live without it." And as Liam was saying, it is a running documentation of every decision we have ever made. And everybody has access to find processes, details, SOPs all in one spot. So these are for you. And by the way, we'll have these available for you afterwards. One is that your teams and your channel should have a purpose. It should be really clear and it should be around the project or the processes that a team needs to have access to. So each one should be a very clear description. Number two is that we need to establish asynchronous norms, right? So what is the way of working using Teams? So one, any conversation that's about a project or a process that we're working on should be put in the channel, not as a private chat. Because once it's a private chat, you and I are the only ones who know that it exists or why we got there. So if we put it in the team where that conversation is supposed to be, everybody can follow along and understand the context behind it, and always be tagging the person or the team and write as if, as Liam said, an archaeologist was going to see this. Okay.
Yep.
Step three is use your channel posts and do threaded replies. So if you're going to reply something, right click on it, hit the little reply button to keep the thoughts together and make it a very searchable record. Number four is to pin, save, and organize. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but if you see something that you need to remember and get easy access to, you can hit a right click and hit pin. That keeps it at the top of that chat for you so you can find it really well. Also use good naming conventions because well-organized files and pinned messages will help you stop wasting time searching for things. The other thing in that one is to make sure that you're using hyperlinks for documents so that you're updating the master, right? Don't save version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4. It's doing that for you in the background, right? So just
Right.
update the document. Step 5, and this is a big one, and Leah, maybe you can jump in on the importance of clarity and transparency of ownership. One of the things that I find is that teams are trying to use PowerPoint as the world's most robust project planning tool. And all the details of the project are lost on slides. They keep some table in PowerPoint saying who's going to do what by when, and then it gets lost. Yeah, what would you suggest around that?
Well, time
Not
to
to
get
do
a
that.
project management system. To be completely honest with you, that would be the biggest one. Who owns the information? Who are the stakeholders inside of that project that's being executed upon? And then what are the timelines? So we use Asana for that. You can use, Trello is free. You can use that as an example to all the way up to very advanced project management systems. We also use Jira for a lot of our engineering teams to be able to
Mhm.
execute on this. It really doesn't matter what it is. It's just you have to identify an owner, stakeholders, timeline, and then be able to basically fill out that documentation. And as long as you have that, then you can go back at any point and you can query it. And to your point, Scott, the ability to just be able to type in, like, working on Roche partnership contract as an example. And then if you have all of these naming conventions set up properly, you can pull up all that information instantaneously. But if it's all in private chats and no, or Google Doc or in slides as an example, then you can't really get that searchability. And that's what's critically important.
Yeah. And for those that are a teams-based organization, look at Planner, look at Tasks. It's free, it's built in. Again, whether you use Asana or Smartsheet or doesn't matter, just pick one and actually use it, right? Step 6, and this is one that I actually learned from Liam, is replace status meeting with update channels, right? I think that we spend a lot of our time in meetings giving each other the status of here's everything that got done. Liam, do you want to maybe just share a little bit about your hierarchy around the use of different channels for
Sure. So
communication?
I have this hierarchy of communication. So at the top of the pyramid, it's in person. In person is better than video. Video is better than audio. Audio is better than instant messaging. Instant messaging is better than email or project management. But the base should be email and project management. And then as you move up that that totem pole, or not the totem pole, that pyramid, you get to the very top, which is in-person communication. For a remote organization, it's incredibly expensive for in-person communication because we all have to fly everyone into one location. Doesn't mean that we don't do it. We just make sure that we're doing it in a way that is as cost efficient as humanly possible. And when you're in an office, all of that communication can be in person, but it's not documented. And so this is what's really problematic when you think about those hierarchy of communication forms. You need to be able to make sure that it's documented, particularly for your remote team members if you're working in a hybrid environment, which I'm sure probably the majority of people are.
Yeah, one of the practices around this that I really like is the use of video. So, for example, many of you might be on a cross functional team building a training program or creating the new release for your CRM, whatever that project is. And often it's not until we get to the project update meeting, the project team meeting, that people are saying, oh, here's what I got done last week, where what we really need to use that time for is to fix the problems or the things that didn't work that required creativity and debate and discussion. And so if we can move that stuff to a video that's posted in the channel a couple days before, and I mean this isn't like Hollywood style video. This is just grabbing Zoom or whatever tool you
Loom
have,
is a really good one.
right?
LOOM.
Loom is great.
It just allows you to click a button and it grabs your screen and then it puts you in a little video in the corner and you can describe everything that's currently happening. And to your point, Scott, we never discuss what we agree on
Yeah.
synchronously. We only discuss what we disagree on synchronously. And
Can you
so probably about 95% of the stuff that you're meeting about, you agree on. Why
right?
we need to talk about it?
Violent
You've already
agreement.
agreed upon it. That's
Makes
it.
us it makes
Let's
us feel
focus
good
on
though.
it does make you feel good. And in that context, go and just have, a kumbaya session and I'm all for it. Like that's definitely something that's important to everybody.
Yeah.
But take the 5% that you disagree on and spend 95% of your time on that. Because then you're going to be able to get to much better decision making long term. And also settle a lot of beefs.
Mhm.
It's like that elephant in the room of, well, how are we supposed to hit Q3 targets because Susan from marketing is not doing her job? That's
Yeah.
really what you need to talk about. I know that those are difficult conversations to have, but those are the ones that we focus on for synchronous conversations. And the stuff that we all agree on, forget about it. It's easy.
Yeah. I one of the meetings I was in recently with a client, we tried it for the first time with them. We said, "Hey, instead of doing the demo of the new release of CRM during the meeting, record." It was a 33-second recording, and it said, "Hey, here is how this new thing works. You click here, here's the drop downs, and post it and ask the question, "Hey, if anybody has something that we need to discuss during the team meeting because you don't like how it works, put it in this list." And so they did. Boom, boom, boom. I think there were 5 things. And then the owner of it was able to resolve 3 of them live, like
Mm,
like before the meeting. They were able to go, "Oh, actually you misunderstood this, or I can change that real quick." They only had 2 things left to talk about by the time they got together.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just so wonderful to not have to in a meeting and watch someone describe an issue that you already solved 2 weeks ago and just sitting in. I mean, and I'm also one of these people. You're not paying attention. You're answering your emails while you're on Zoom. You're playing Candy Crush on your phone. Like, I get it. I understand exactly what's going on. But the reality is that let's all optimize people for work that they're really excited about
Hmm.
doing. I mean, that makes for a better work environment, in my opinion. But
Right. And,
I'm just a remote work guy.
and Liam, maybe there were a couple of the questions that came in on LinkedIn that apply here. So one of the questions was how to, in a politically safe, polite way, not attend a meeting that you aren't contributing to and you're not getting anything out of that you couldn't have read. What suggestions have you seen work to kind of
It has to
in a
come from
corporate
top
environment?
down.
Hmm.
Yeah, so the it's a really complicated answer. It's a very complicated answer. I think in the reality, it has to come from top down. It has to come from your executive team. So we have something in our company, which is if a meeting is not valuable to you, you can leave it without announcing that you're leaving. You can just hit a button and disappear. And no one should have a negative connotation of that. It's just, it's not generating value for you. We record every single one of our meetings, so someone can pick up the recording. There's no more value for that particular call for me. So therefore, I can apply my time towards something else and do it. That's the way that we handle it. I think a much more kind of politically correct version to do it, if you're not the executive of the company or the owner, is to be able to say, hey, is there anything else that's going to be on the agenda here that you want my direct input from? Because otherwise, I could just save you guys some time and I'll get back to the other project that I was working on. Right. And that's kind of a nicer way of saying that, to be able to just say, well, my version of that is, you're essentially wasting my time here. I could be working on more interesting. Let me just get back to work and make the
Hmm.
company more money in more interesting ways. And I think that that's probably the way to do it inside of large corporate, but it's always a push and pull. So when your manager has those types of issues, I talked a lot about this, Scott. I think I mentioned it to you, which is your goal as a manager is to remove distractions from your team members. That's fundamentally what you're supposed to do as a manager, is remove distractions from your team members. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of managers, they are the biggest distraction towards their team members. They know exactly what they need to do. You just need to get out of their way and have them do it. And so having that constant reporting structure that's synchronous, that I have to jump onto a call for to be able to break down, it doesn't make fundamental sense when you could use a project management system as an example to say, I spoke to 82 leads this week and 17 of them were interested in jumping on a call with me, and I did 7 calls,
Yeah.
right? You don't need to jump onto a synchronous call to be able to do that. That's an update
Yeah.
fundamentally. The big problem is, oh, I was supposed to do 87 calls and I'm only at 7. That's when the manager needs to come in and figure out, well, what's going on here? How can we fix it?
Yeah. Or if, let's say I'm supposed to get feedback from 15 countries on our new training module, and I only got to 4, right? I could do the status update that I'm at 4. The agenda of that meeting could be, what's the barrier and what can we do to help you get to the rest because we're 2 weeks behind.
Absolutely. And then on the other side of it too, people, we're big on the other side. Let's say you were supposed to get to 18 countries, but you got to 28.
Awesome.
Let's have a meeting about how successful Scott is and figure out why he's doing so well and what he could teach other people inside of the organization. You need to look at the wins as much as the losses. But to me, I very simply, I have green, yellow, red on all of my metrics on my dash. I'm going to be getting into this, but I have green, yellow, red. Green, I don't pay attention to. Yellow, I look at, and then I spend 90% of my time on red.
Excellent. Let's finish these last couple. So number 7 is minimize notifications. You need to curate your notifications. I'm not saying that in medical affairs we can turn off completely. Like, that's sometimes some of us have roles where you have to be available at certain times, but you can curate those, right? You can say, I want these alerts, but not these, right? So minimize them because they do create distractions, and then check them at whatever the right interval is for you. Number 8 is we need to manage these channels. Like, when the project's over, archive it, move it over, get it where it needs to be for long-term storage. Number 9, record every single meeting. Like, there's really no meetings, group team function, project teams, development meetings, record them, right? If somebody needs to go back and find something, they can. And that brings us to the last one, which is making that even more feasible, is most of you are either in the process or have Microsoft Copilot. I'm working with a client that deployed Copilot, and I can go in and say, what is the status on the new medical information process that we're building? And it's looking at slides and recordings of meetings and emails and compiles for me that update. Right. Or, what are the three barriers that we're running into with this? And it will tell me those things. But if you don't start collecting the data in the right way, you can't use that type of system to find it. So it starts with behavior, it starts with action, and then it goes to technology.
And that pulls me right into the next one, the last point, which is detailed metrics.
Go for it.
So to your point, Scott, every single person in the company, at least in our companies, they have to have at least one longitudinal and quantifiable metric that they report on weekly. So this is the tricky part. You need to take those metrics and you need to give them to everyone in the company. And ideally, giving everyone the same informational advantage, as I said, it allows for you to create this environment where they have the same information as the CEO, so they can start to make decisions without actually speaking to their manager directly about it. So just case in point, here's an example of that inside of Asana, which is the project management system that we have inside of our organization. And here is the target. You can see, is it off track, blocked, on track, done, and then the completion rate. So as I talked about, I have these three different colors, green, yellow, and red. I focus on reds. That's where my energy is. Greens, I don't need to care about. If anything, actually, greens are, man, maybe we didn't set an aggressive enough rock for this quarter for you to be able to get to that particular target. But if you go into it, you can see some of these have multiple different comments, and those are just updates talking about what the actual situation is, and then we discuss it inside of these meetings. And then I have an issues list, which is essentially just us breaking down what are the different issues going on in the company. And this was from a few years ago, but this is Silicon Valley Bank could be a huge opportunity for us, which was an issue that I put down. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, and a whole bunch of companies that I invested in needed bridge financing to be able to continue to operate. And I thought that we could basically buy a bunch of our competitors for a dime on the dollar, because I thought, okay, well, the entire banking system might be collapsing. Those are the types of things that we discuss. But what we do in this is, if we have less than 3 issues in this issues list, we don't meet to be able to discuss them because we just don't have enough information. So we put in an issue, we discuss it asynchronously. So we have comments that go back and forth. And then if we've completed that issue, if we've come to a conclusion on it, then we clear the issue before the actual meeting time. And usually the vast majority of the time, it's HR issues that are our biggest one that we really have to hash out synchronously, meaning is this person is the right person for this particular department or position? What's our technology stack look like? We're going to be making this really important decision on using this tech stack or this other tech stack, those types of things. And here is the actual targets that we have quarterly. I think this was from like 2023 of unique, and these are the longitudinal metrics that I talked about: unique website visitors, trial rates, MQL rates, inbound deals, the amount of meetings that we have, and every single person is connected to those metrics. So Andy, as an example, is our head of marketing, and he has those core metrics that are needed for him, and then whether or not we've actually achieved those for the month, year, or quarter.
And in medical affairs, we know that it's hard to find metrics that are sometimes that black and white. We do, for those who have attended it, great. If you haven't, I suggest you check out the YouTube video, but we have a whole session just on the impact of medical affairs. And the area that Liam just talked about are these outcomes under contribution, right? We don't need to keep a task list for everybody. That's their job. What we need to be tracking is, this is the outcome I need. And just let's flip through these really, really quick, right? Outcomes I need from medical information, right? Response accuracy and timeliness. If I go to MedCom's publication output, citation metrics, adherence to the timelines, like we just need to know if we're on track. HEOR, budget impact analysis complete, RWE studies conducted, etc. looking at like training, the number of educational program outreach, feedback scores that we're getting, knowledgeable retention assessments, compliance, regulatory audit findings, completion rates, and then looking at insights, right? The inbound, are they being collected? Are they actionable? And have they been used, right? And so we're not doing a whole session on metrics today. That would take an entire day. But watch that other video on KPIs, metrics, med impact. If anybody needs help with the medical impact scorecard, let me know. I can definitely work with you on that.
Perfect. Yeah, and when you get to the end of this entire process, fundamentally, if you implement this type of methodology, you're going to have greater inclusivity and cultural exchange inside of your organization. One of the things that I found so exciting and interesting being in an organization that has team members in dozens of different countries all over the world, I had a meeting with someone on a Monday about them transitioning from one sex to another. And then 3 days later, I had a conversation with someone discussing whether or not they wanted to take on a second wife. And I thought to myself, in what world would those two people be able to work together? And it's very exciting because with remote work, you have that. You have the ability for people to be able to pull in those different opinions, whether you agree with them or not. It creates a much more diverse labor pool for you to be able to pull out different opinions from. We talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, remote is really diverse. And and we see that as a huge advantage inside of our organization because we'll have different opinions on different people's perspectives and how our product or services are being received. Another big concept is charisma bias. So I talk about this a lot inside of the book. Scott, you're very charismatic in the way that you communicate with people. And inside of asynchronous organizations, that advantage essentially disappears. I like to call charisma bias, my other way of saying it is basically my Captain America bias. So if you walk into a room right now and it was like a glass office and you see in that office a 6'2" jacked white guy talking, I could guarantee you that his idea is probably the one that gets adopted. And it's not necessarily his fault. It's just like, that's fundamentally the biggest concentration of people over 6 feet. It's not in the MBA, it's in Fortune 500 CEOs. It's like these metrics are very, very clear, right? So that charisma bias, whereas me, the tech nerd in the background, I'm not going to go and debate Captain America. I'm kind of intimidated by Captain America. I'm just going to stay in my corner and not talk. But in asynchronous environments, you don't have that. That charisma essentially disappears. So you have an even playing field, and people that are truly insightful about a particular issue can have their ideas flourish much more often than other people because the delivery of that idea is not very good when you're not going through a Captain America. And by the way, our CRO of our company is literally like a Captain America. He's 275 pounds of pure steel. And I love it that he now has these ideas that have just kind of disappeared because his advantage essentially is for naught inside of our organization. Hiring becomes faster, easier, and much better to scale. Leadership is agnostic towards anything other than results. And a global talent pool means better talent, period. And even if you are, HIPAA compliant as an example, you can still hire from a lot of different countries that are HIPAA compliant. And it's important to be able to take those into consideration. There's so many people that you can hire from the Midwest that are amazing workers, and remote work and hybrid gives you that type of opportunity. And then lastly, managers will stop paying attention to presence and instead on results. Couple last points that I want to leave with you, and then we can get directly into questions. Remote work, in my opinion, gives employers and employees the opportunity to find the best of each other. So whether you're in Bangladesh or Cairo or Toronto or San Francisco, I'm hopeful that in the future, we will have the ability to be recognized for how well we work and not where we are working, which I think is at least one of the core tenets of the mission of our company, empowering the world's transition towards remote work. And fundamentally here, remote work is not going away. I wanted to reinforce that. You have to adapt now. And if anyone is interested in the book, you can pick it up in pretty much all bookstores now in the United States. And if you want to kind of hit me directly, youtube.com/running remote is where we have hundreds of videos connected to all of these little nerdy details. So if you're interested in checking that out, go check that out. But I would love to be able to get into some of the questions if we have any, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody who's live with us on the session here that has a question, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. And I will start with the question around connection. So personal connections. What happens when all of our meetings are now scheduled and agended, and how do we maintain that personal connection with people?
So there's two ways of doing it. Number one, just because a formal meeting is scheduled doesn't mean you can't kind of like chat with your Microsoft Teams bestie and just jump on call and chat, right? Like that, you should do that, right? That's creating connection with other team members. That's something that when you think about asynchronous work, it's focused on the outcome, not necessarily how things get done. So I'm big on just kind of chatting with people. I do that a lot inside of my job internally with all of our different team members. And I have a lot of fun, but I'm not saying that it's directly connected back to work. It's just to connect with people. Secondarily to that, I have one of these, which we've been using recently, and we put it on every Friday afternoon, and we play Oculus Rift games together, like virtual reality video games together. And I got to tell you, if you have not tried one of these things, they're $300. They're so much fun. We play a zombie game right now where we all have to fight off rounds of zombies, and we have to kind of like nail up a board for our house, and we have to get a gun, and then we have to we get knives and all this kind of stuff. It's not HR approved at all. We don't really care. And the cool thing is that we're all on audio. So just literally last week, one of the team members in the company was like, "The zombies are coming through the front door. I'm out of bullets." And then I looked at him and I threw him my shotgun and he caught it like in virtual reality. And I thought that's so cool to be able to have a game like that you can play. And it just builds that type of teamwork. So that's how I kind of create connection. And then before we even discuss that, I want to be able to reinforce its mission, vision, and values.
Wonderful.
That's what really focuses. If you don't have that, and I'm assuming everyone does, but if you don't, if 50% of your team cannot identify what the mission of the company is, you do not have mission, vision, values. You need to go back and figure that out.
I absolutely love that. Guys, I know we're out of time. If I could ask you just one big favor, the biggest thing you took out of today, the biggest thing, the one thing you needed to hear that you can put in place, can you just let Liam know, put it in the chat so that we can give him kind of a thank you. And the first 3 people that drop something in, if Liam won't give you a book, I'll buy it. So let's get some books out to you guys. Just drop in the biggest things that you took out of today on our way out the door here.
Thanks so much for giving me the time here. I'm so incredibly excited about just kind of seeing where we're at for this new era of remote work. And it's exciting to see that the medical industry is really adopting it and that it's not going away. There's so many companies, like I go into a lot of calls right now where it's all about return to office. And I totally understand, but you know, remote is still there. Hybrid is still there. It's still something that is a core, as I talked about before. It's not going away. And so I really appreciate you letting me have the opportunity to chat to everybody about it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Michael, Kimberly, David. I'm going to connect with you, get you guys some books. Thank you for sharing, understanding remote aspects, practices in teams, and diversity, being more productive in remote working. Really appreciate everybody joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.